Welcome to the video lesson on the poem Assassination. This poem is prescribed by the Independent Examinations Board for South African students in grade 12. Consider the picture that I have selected for the title slides. You will see a collage of newspaper headlines published soon after the assassination of Martin Luther King Jr. What emotions do these headlines evoke? Pause the video for a moment and think about your reaction to the visual stimulus. We always start our poetry analysis with a biography of the poet. In the IEB Poetry Anthology clusters, the name of the poet is given as Don L. Lee. This was the name of the African-American poet and activist who wrote the poem. In 1974, he visited Africa and was so moved by the experience that he changed his name to the Swahili Haki Madhubuti. A renowned writer and academic, he is the founder of Third World Press, the largest independent black-owned press in the USA. The photograph of him on the right is a fairly recent one, showing a smiling, affable, approachable gentleman. It is important to note that Haki Madhubuti was not always the friendly, uncle-like figure that we see in recent photographs. He has paid his dues in the world of activism and academia, making his voice heard over many decades of injustices in the USA. On this slide, you will see the evolution of Don L. Lee to Haki R. Madhubuti, from the young black firebrand pictured on the left, to the serious academic in the middle, to the more relaxed gentleman on the right. Take a look at some of the work he has produced. On the left, you will see two of his earlier publications, Black Pride and Think Black, written during the height of the civil rights movement in the 1960s. These are followed by two vinyl records, Rapping and Reading and Rise Vision Coming. If you're into the history of rap music and art as a form of protest, you need to do some research into the work of this remarkable man. In later years, he wrote and edited books on numerous issues that relate directly to being black in the United States. Kwanzaa is a holiday celebrated by African Americans. Taking Bullets is an exploration of the phenomenon of young black men being sucked into a never-ending spiral of violence in the States. Think of the shootings of Trayvon Martin, Stephen Clark, and Michael Brown. Black Panther is a study of the Marvel comic book and movie franchise, interrogating the premise that there is a need for black superheroes. He's also written Not Our President, a critique of Donald Trump's presidency. One of the reasons that we study such a wide variety of poetry at school is to expose our students to the many voices that are in the world, voices that need to be heard. I hope that this little bit of information about Haki Madhubuti inspires you to do some of your own research about this incredible man. I recommend that you start with this article published in the Chicago Reader in 2018. You'll find it online. You should have a copy of the poem in front of you. Follow as I read the text to you. It was wild. The bullet hit high, the throat neck, and from everywhere, the motel, from under bushes and cars, from around corners and across streets, Out of the garbage cans and from rat holes in the earth, they came running. With guns drawn, they came running toward the king, all of them fast and sure, as if the king was going to fire back. They came running fast and sure, in the wrong direction. The title of the poem is simple, a single emotive word that alerts us to the violence that is central to this poem. Of course, you know that assassination is another word for murder. It's the term we use to describe the premeditated and treacherous killing of a politically prominent person. You'll soon see that the poem is about the moments after the 1968 assassination of Martin Luther King Jr., the civil rights leader. The photograph on the slide shows the mortally wounded King lying on the balcony of a motel in Memphis, Tennessee, as staff and security gather around in shock and disbelief. I expect all of you to know that Martin Luther King Jr. was the leader of the US civil rights movement, and I hope that you've all read or heard and analyzed his 1963 I Have a Dream speech. If you don't know about him, do a quick Google search to add to your knowledge. At first glance, you will have noticed the unusual typography of the poem, the irregular line lengths, the seemingly haphazard placing of the lines on the page reflect the chaos and wildness of the moments following the gunshot that killed Martin Luther King. There is little to no punctuation in the poem. In fact, it starts seemingly in the middle of a sentence. There's no capital letter for the first word. We are dumped straight into the madness of the moment. It was wild. The gruesome detail of where the bullet struck the victim is evident in lines 3 and 4. The bullet hit the victim high, in his neck, his throat. Such a wound would, no doubt, be fatal. The use of parentheses is interesting. It highlights the tender spot in which the victim was hit. It's an additional piece of information which serves to shock us, the readers, as we picture a relatively young man cruelly struck down in the most violent of manners. This is followed by an ampersand. That's the name for the symbol that we use for the word and. The abbreviation contributes to the abrupt and urgent tone of the poem. The speaker describes how numerous people rush out from everywhere after the gunshot. We are not sure who all of these people are. The speaker just uses the personal pronoun they as a blanket term for all of them. It's intriguing that some come from the oddest of places, from under bushes and cars, from out of the garbage cans and from rat holes. These are places we'd expect to find trash and vermin. They are derogatory terms. They go a long way to describe the type of people who surround the victim. What do you think the speaker is saying about these people, especially if some of them are police, security, or law enforcement personnel? We are told that these people arrive guns drawn. There's an irony here. They have arrived with their guns when the victim has already been shot dead. They run toward the victim, not after the assassin. These men are obviously well trained and competent, but they weren't able to prevent the killing of this man. The use of the capital letter K in king is a deliberate contextual marker. We realize here that the dead man is Martin Luther King. Of course, there is also the suggestion that the dead man is a king amongst men, a leader. Line 20 shows the absurdity of the situation. The dying man will be unable to shoot back. The guns of the security detail, the accompanying police, whoever they are redundant once the crime has been committed. The repeated lines at the end of the poem emphasize the absurdity of the situation. By running towards the victim, they are unable to do anything to protect him. They are too late. The right direction would have been to run after the assassin and those who opposed the message for which Martin Luther King died. The absurdities of the poem underline its message. The famous quote by King on the right of the slide is part of this message. Returning hate for hate multiplies hate, adding deeper darkness to a night already devoid of stars. Darkness cannot drive out darkness. Only light can do that. Hate cannot drive out hate. Only love can do that. The title slides show this collage of newspaper headlines announcing to the world that the civil rights icon was dead. Many American cities descended into violence as rioters burned buildings and stoned vehicles. I was a very young girl when this happened, and I certainly didn't understand the enormity of the event. But I do remember my parents talking about it in hushed tones, wondering whether the entire world would topple over into anarchy. I do remember very clearly the day that Chris Hani was assassinated. I was teaching in Cape Town at the time, and I imagine that the emotions of fear and confusion that we South Africans experienced that dark day in 1993 was similar to those experienced by Americans in 1968. It was a chaotic time for everyone. Ask your parents and grandparents about their memories of the day and the subsequent violence that threatened to derail the South African peace process as we inched our way to the first democratic elections. It's time for questions. Writing answers is good practice for the exams. The questions relate to the typography, the punctuation, and the tone of the poem. You're also asked to reflect on who they are in the poem. Pause the video here and write your answers. I mean it. Writing the answers yourself before waiting for them to come up on the screen is the best way to practice for the final exams. Come on, do it. Are you done? Let's have a look at the answers. Your answer to question 1 should include references to the lack of capital letter at the beginning of the poem and the use of the word wild. In question 2, you should mention the sense of urgency and shock that is evident in the poem. Your discussion of the use of parenthesis in your answer to question 3 needs to be detailed. Take time here to see the depth to which this model answer has gone. Can you do the same? It takes practice and research before you write the exam. The seemingly haphazard typography of this poem is one of its most prominent features. Be sure that you are prepared for a question about it in the exams. The last question cannot be answered with any degree of certainty. The poet has deliberately used the ambiguity of they to convey the sense of chaos in the aftermath of the assassination. What other art forms could you use with this poem? What about the quote by the recently deceased American Senator John Lewis? He said of Martin Luther King's death, "When he died, I think something died in all of us. Something died in America. Each day I think we must find a way to dream the dream that he dreamed and build on what he left all of us." The cartoon in the middle shows the recently dead Martin Luther King talking to Mahatma Gandhi, an Indian activist who was also assassinated. Gandhi says to King, "The odd thing about assassins, Dr. King, is that they think they've killed you." This conveys the hopeful notion that you can kill a man, but you cannot kill his ideas, his ideals. The last visual pairing shows a list of names of black people killed in the USA. It's an astonishingly long list of names, ordinary citizens killed at the hands of police. You'll recognize the most recent names: George Floyd, Breonna Taylor. Do you think that there's a case to be made for their deaths to be called assassinations? Do you think that Martin Luther King's death is part of the Black Lives Matter narrative? Lastly, we'll take a look at two poems that I have paired with Assassination. We Real Cool and Assassination of John F. Kennedy were both written by Gwendolyn Brooks, a contemporary of Haki Madhubuti and a poet whom he much admired. We Real Cool uses an unusual positioning of the pronoun we, reminiscent of the typography and layout of Madhubuti's poem. The assassination of John F. Kennedy, an event which happened in 1963, is a poet's response to the death of a progressive American politician. Read the Brooks poem. Compare her response to the death of the American president. He was shot dead while traveling in a motorcade in Dallas, Texas, to Madhubuti's response to King's death. What do they have in common? What are the differences? I'd like to make use of this opportunity to acknowledge the collegiality and generosity of fellow English teacher Petronella van Rooyen. She currently teaches at Curo in Bloemfontein and is a member of our Free State Northwest Northern Cape IEB cluster group. She very kindly shared some of her excellent materials with me on this poem. What makes this collaboration even more special to me is that many moons ago, I was her teacher. A number of students have reached out to me on YouTube requesting questions or worksheets for the prescribed poems. Please note that I'm unable to share my students' worksheets with you, as these are restricted by copyright legislation. I use these two study guides with my own students. Please feel free to contact the publishing companies yourself. I've included their email addresses here for your convenience. Both of these study guides are available digitally. It's been great to have you with me for the analysis of another IEB poem. Please pay it forward. Share the video with all of your friends and colleagues who study the IEB curriculum. Until next time, goodbye.